Okay. Okay, we have quorum. Okay. So I'd like to call this meeting of the Audit Committee of November 18th to order. We're going to begin by certifying the closed meeting. In order to comply with Section 2.23712D of the Code of Virginia, it is necessary for the committee to certify that since the Fairfax County School Board Audit Committee convened a closed meeting on November 18, 2024, to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the committee during closed meeting. Do I have a motion? Moved by Mr. Moon, a second. Seconded by Ms. Henderson. All those in favor? Okay. It is unanimous with Ms. St. John Cunning away from the table. We will begin the meeting by going to item number 1, and I understand that Ms. Moore will be leading us on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I will be providing you with the status of our FY25 audits. So I want to start with our 2 audits, which are the procurement process audit and the student disciplinary audit. These audits are currently in process and they are in the execution phase. And we are planning on presenting these audits later on in the year, maybe around January or February audit committee meetings. We also have our ongoing continuous monitoring. We have started our Q1 continuous monitoring, which includes site visits at 15 schools and a review of transactions which related to career and technical education at 1 site. This Q1, we will be doing an analysis for continuous monitoring, and then in Q2, we will be requesting documentation at that time based on our analysis from Q1 and Q2. We will also begin our business process audits. I believe we conducted one already, which was presented in our last meeting. And then we will continue to conduct business process audits. I believe we'll have a first set that will be presented around February or March of the upcoming year. And as it relates to our other OAG duties, I'm happy to announce we have started our FY26 risk assessment process. So that includes benchmarking, conducting surveys, conducting interviews, and collecting financial impacts on our audit topics that we plan to audit for FY26. Our next item is the fraud, waste, and abuse inquiries, and Esther will be presenting that as item 2, which is an update of those inquiries. As for our audit recommendation follow-up, we will be presenting the results of our October 31st follow-up in our next upcoming meeting. And our last and final item we have is the outreach and education. I'm happy to announce that I will actually be presenting a 3-hour CPS, Certified Professional Education course related to both sides of an audit, looking through the lens of the auditor and an audit client. And we will have community use joining us, as well as food and nutritional services, which we have recently done an audit on. So they will be joining us with that audit, with that presentation. And so that is our audit status update, and I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan.
Great. Are there any questions on that audit update? Okay, seeing no questions, move on to item number 2. Over to Esther.
Thank you. So if the clerk could help us to put up the second item, which is the OAG internal inquiries updates, I can actually start talking. We, from time to time, we will bring it back to the audit committee about the fraud, waste, and abuse situation or allegations that we received. From the beginning of this fiscal year through earlier this month, we have received a total of 28 situations. There are a multiple method that people come to us, which is listed on this document in front of us. And all the inquiries for last fiscal year have been closed. And on this table, you can see kind of like a comparison from the previous years to the current up to date about the situations that we received. As you can see, there are different areas, including conflict of interest, documentations, procurement, residency, use of assets, etc. Some of the situations are actually have no relation to fraud, waste, and abuse at FCPS. We got some of that as well. But you can see that the general trend that we can tell from now is that there are more cases that actually fall under the categories that is OAG, Office of Auditor General, could perform the preliminary review on them according to Policy 1107 and Regulation 1410. So I think that this is a very good trend, and as I have explained in many of the meetings before, you can see that fiscal year 24 reached 79 versus previous years is like 45 to 50. I do not believe that that is because we have suddenly more situations that are alarming. Is more because of the awareness that the office and then the school board audit committee that we have done together, so that the public and then the employees are aware of these channels to report situation, so that we can remediate a situation from becoming a concern. So with that, I would like to hand the time over to Ryan and then to solicit any feedback from the committee members.
Okay. Is there any feedback from the committee members? Okay, seeing none, we actually need to go back to item 2.04, which is the approval of minutes. So this is something new to our meetings, and with the great support of Janet, we are now in timely form with our minutes. So I am going to ask the board to approve the minutes for September 16th and October 28th audit committee meetings. So I move that we adopt those minutes. Do I have a second? So Mr. Moon first. So all those in favor of adopting the minutes? That is unanimous. Okay, thank you for that awkward segue. So we will now be going to item 3, and we'll turn it over to Luke Robertson.
All right, thank you. So this was the FY22 through FY24 at local school activity funds audit results, year-over-year comparison. So, yeah, the other one. So while that's being pulled up, just to recap, so the purpose of this presentation was to give the audit committee some context for the results that were included in the FY24 report that was presented at the last audit committee. And just as a summary of what we're looking at, so the local school activity funds are non-appropriated funds derived from extracurricular school activities. These could be related to entertainment, athletics, facilities fees, club dues, vending machine proceeds that are not deposited in the school nutrition program accounts, sales for any and all activities involving schools, personnel, students, property, etc. And there were 204 sites in the FY22 that had local school activity funds, 203 in 23, and 202 sites in 24. So moving on, the three main process areas that OAG identified relating to local school activity funds are the accounting procedures, the cash disbursements, and cash receipts process areas. We separate our audit results into these three broad process areas to keep the reporting organized. And then for the following 3 slides, you can refer to the Appendix A, which is in the last slide of this report, for the descriptions of any exceptions noted on the graph. So moving into the first accounting procedures results. So as we can see here, there was an uptick from 22 to 23 in the bank reconciliation. This was a result of new verbiage in the school finance handbook and regulations that now the principals and finance techs and AAs have to sign and date the bank statement while reconciling to the posting journal at the end of every month. So this was something that as we were doing our continuous monitoring site visits, we tried to make sure that the schools were aware of this new requirement in 22, and then in 23, we began to write exceptions for it, and that continued into 24 as well. So that's why there's such a sharp uptick between 22 and 23. And for fund account balance, we did see it kind of stabilize again from what we saw from FY '22. There was an uptick of up to 57 in the previous fiscal year. And then when it comes to the purchasing process, that is a new category. So we were reporting all exceptions with purchasing processes under sufficient documentation, but we decided to make this new purchasing process area to differentiate between a transaction that was done maybe out of sequence rather than a transaction that didn't have the sufficient documentation available. And for the next slide, for cash disbursements, the results from the last 2 fiscal years did not have any drastic change compared to the population total, but there was an increase in timely payment exceptions from 0 in FY '23 to 10 in FY '24. Again, adding the purchasing process exception theme in '23 caused the decrease in the sufficient documentation and then the increase in the new category as those purchases were now reported separately. And lastly, the cash receipts year over year. So we can see that we did start last year with the activity gate receipt procedures where we're going out to schools and we're observing how they're collecting funds, how they're collecting cash for athletic events. We're continuing to do that again this year. And then everything else that you see noted here, there's nothing really of concern that we identified aside from 7 instances where timely receipts, essentially cash was not received by the finance office in a timely manner, as opposed to timely deposit where it was received but not deposited in a timely manner. And that is the summary of the results for the year over year for the last 3 fiscal years. All information in this presentation was previously published and reported on in prior audit committees. And if you would like full context for these reports, those are hyperlinked there. And I'll turn it back over to Ryan for questions.
Great, thanks, Luke. Mr. Moon, you were moving your thing. Did you want to?
Okay, thank you. I didn't get to go to that hyperlink. I didn't get to go to those hyperlinks
Okay.
to see what all the information were provided. So let me ask you this. When I see these numbers on those 3 slides, 4 through 6, are they instances of exceptions? And when I say, for example, if I say 40, would you be able to tell us 40 out of how many? Is that 40 schools out of 12? 4?
It's for schools, correct.
But there could be a bank reconciliation could include 12 monthly reconciliations, and
Yeah.
whether the 40 represents 40 months' worth of reconciliations, or is that just a 40 schools with, could be, a school could have a multiple instances?
Yeah, so
I'm trying to get a better sense of context.
the figures, so for example, 40 would be there were 40 schools that had noted exceptions with
At
the
least
bank
once.
reconciliation.
At least once.
Could be more potentially. But with the end of the year testing, we're only testing the month of June. So it wouldn't be multiple months. Then the same goes with fund account balances. It could be multiple accounts that ended in deficit, but it's at 57 schools.
Okay,
So one school could have one school could have
okay.
more than that.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Ms. Anderson.
So I noticed that overall, when I looked at the trends for '22 through '24, for the most part, schools were taking in as much in activity funds as they were paying out. So it was generally pretty much in and out. But when you look at the balances, at the high school level, they've got about, say, 6 months in reserves for their balances. So, but at the elementary school and the middle school level, they were generally much higher. In some cases, they had a full year sitting there in the account before, the year even started. So I'm wondering, because this is an area that for me seems a little bit ripe for abuse because of turnover with finance technicians and stuff, is there some target amount that the schools are told that they should have in their activity balances at the beginning of the year?
That's a great question, but I think the answer I would need to defer to management because the scope of work, Ninette, on this one is for us to validate the balances, but then as to why, what is the right amount to start with and then to end with, it was not within the scope. So I would need to defer to management to respond.
Seema?
So if you look at elementary schools and middle schools and high schools, you'll see a trend where elementary schools will tend to be $100,000 or less, but then middle schools will be a little bit higher in the $200,000 range, and then high schools will get up into the $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 range. So that, as a general, is a balance that gets maintained just to make sure that the activity gets taken care of for local schools on what they need to do the operations. And that's kind of been the trend. So there's no exact set amount, but there's an average that seems to be maintained.
Yeah, it just seems like it's a lot of money in some cases sitting in the elementary schools that either the amounts could be reduced and basically effectively given back to parents. And also, like I said, it's a lot of money sitting there that's basically not getting used, and it just increases the opportunity then for fraud. So I would just suggest that maybe that be looked at. I understand there's an issue with some schools going into deficit sometimes, but where they're taking in just as much money as they need to go out every year, I'm not sure I understand why all the money is just sitting there then.
Seema?
Yeah. I also wanted to mention, Ms. Henderson, that a lot of these funds are cumulative, so they do carry from year to year. And local school activity funds, they're set up in specific accounts. So those accounts are to be used only for the purpose of that activity. So if they're raised for a certain club, then they can only be used for that club. And they continue to stay there to be used for that specific purpose, if that helps. And that's why you see the balances.
Okay, Ms. Lady?
I just think I want to add that it's also not just money collected for an actual activity, like a field trip. Can you give some more clarification on the other funds that are in there? Because, I mean, local schools are given a certain amount of discretionary money. Like, I could be way off base, but I feel like when I was at Chantilly, there was a technology local school fund that we were trying to be the first one-to-one school before we went to that. There was also a fund because we were trying to redo bathrooms, and that's an astronomical amount. So while it looks like a lot of money, it's not just money we've taken from a family for a specific activity. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
If that
Marty?
helps.
And I was just going, and good evening, everyone. I was just going to follow up on Ms. Lady's comments. We do have schools that are saving toward larger purchases, especially at the elementary school level, because they don't have the same kind of revenue coming in as our middle and high schools. And as a former elementary principal, although it's been 20 years ago, there was a time, and there are still opportunities for principals to look at larger purchases, work with their PTAs to then save those funds over time so that they can make those larger technology purchases or other large purchases. Could be playground equipment, it could be other large items for the school.
And then for those things, like, let's say they've got an account for Science Olympiad, just pick something out of the air. If the school then stops Science Olympiad and the money's sitting there, is anybody then monitoring that and saying, oh, geez, we've got money sitting in here for Science Olympiad that, we're probably never going to use again? Is there some process within the schools to monitor that?
Yes, we monthly review what's sitting there and how the uses are happening for each of the funds. And if we see that funds are not being used or a certain activity gets stopped, we work with the school to make sure it either gets reallocated or gets back to where it needs to be.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Lady?
I just want to add one more thing. As administrator for performing arts, when I was there, we often at the end of the year issued checks back to parents. So if there was money collected for specific, like technical theater, for example, and it was not used, then it had to be returned.
Even those 25-cent checks that go back sometimes that parents are unhappy with, but we still do that by regulation.
Okay, seeing no further comment on this one, we're going to go back to Luke for item number 4, OAG audit technology.
So our office recently acquired Data Snipper, which is a tool that we've been using to perform various school audits. So getting into what exactly we're using it for, it's essentially an add-in into Excel that allows our office to import source documents directly into our work papers. And with that, we can extract information from these documents into cells in our work papers in Excel and tie those references directly to the source documents in the file. That way we can easily reference something. Whenever we click on a cell, it immediately pulls up the PDF or the Excel file or the image file. It allows us to really expedite our review process rather than having to have one window with the Excel workbook, one window with the various PDF files organized just in the drive. It automatically pulls up files as we need. So moving on to the next slide, what are SNPs? Essentially, we first import a PDF or Word, Excel, image file into Excel, and then we organize it using a folder so that we can find files easier. We organize them by school usually. And then from there, we can extract data through different types of SNPs. So we've got text SNP, which if you highlight, you click and drag over a line of text, or you right-click it. If it's detected, then it automatically fills in the cell. So it decreases the amount of manual input required, and then increases accuracy as well on our behalf. Validation SNPs, if there is an attribute that we're testing and we want to mark it as validated, for example, a signature is required on a PO, we click and drag a box over the signature, it automatically generates in the cell with the attribute we're testing a V for validated, and that way every time we click back in, we can see it brings up the source document, we can refer to it. Exception SNP is kind of the opposite of validation. If we see something, if a signature is missing on a line, we just do the same thing, highlight where it should be on the document, and then from there we can refer to it later. And then lastly, there's the sum SNP, which we can select a bunch of numbers on the same document or different documents to total in one cell. That's useful for if we're trying to make sure that the different line items on an invoice add up to the subtotal amounts. And lastly, the table SNP, where we can snip an entire table from a PDF. That's useful in that we can automatically pull the data rather than having to manually input the data. And the way that we have been using it is for our school audits. So for our continuous monitoring program, we've been testing procurement card transactions, we've been testing check disbursements, cash receipts, voided transactions, anything that is maintained on a manual paper file that's scanned over to us. It makes it much simpler for us to not have to manually input, and it's right there for when we're doing our reviews. And then for LSAF, our local school activity fund audit, we used it to do our activity fund deficit balance testing and our bank reconciliation validation. So we'll get into what that looked like in the next slide for the continuous monitoring. So as you can see, and it's a little small, I apologize, but what we have is the left side is our workbook. So we've set up certain columns that we have. We have the school ID, P card number, the transaction date. So this is all information we pulled from PaymentNet on the procurement card transactions. And then we have columns set up where we are looking to make sure that different attributes have been met. So you can see in the column that's highlighted blue, that would be an example of what a text SNP looks like, where we've dragged over the comments on the purchase order on the right side, and it automatically inputs what the purpose of the transaction was for. The same goes for, there's columns that aren't in this screen capture, but anything highlighted on that purchase order in blue has been referenced in the table. If we click on the cell that's been referenced, it automatically pulls it up and highlights where it is. And that's really the majority of what we've been using is the text SNP, because it really decreases the amount of manual input. It makes things faster, it speeds up reviews. And then for our local school activity funds audit on the next slide, this is what we were doing for our bank reconciliation validation. So we go through each individual school, we import the documents into Excel, and then we are validating whether or not the principal signed and whether or not the principal dated. This we do for all 202 schools with local school activity funds. Usually we would have to manually hit Y or N on the first column to make sure that they approved, and then the next column would be, we would have to manually enter in the date. What this does is allows us to, again, not have to manually input that, saves us time, but then as somebody's reviewing all 202 documents, rather than having to open up each individual PDF and then review it and then close and move to the next, it's anytime you click a cell, it's right there. So I think that the benefits I've talked about a couple times, but less manual input is good, makes us more accurate, allows us to reference things much quicker, reviews are much quicker, and there are some other automated features in Data Snipper like document matching where we can, if we have standardized forms that are being used over and over and over again through a certain process, it'll automatically extract that data. What we're finding is a lot of the times it's good for purchase orders because the purchase orders all look the same and they have the same fields. But when it comes to invoices and receipts that correspond to that, they're very, very different because at every receipt and invoice from a different vendor, it never looks the same. So we're trying to figure out ways that we can take document matching further. But for right now, I think that what we're getting the use out of this tool is really, it's just for speeding up reviews and making us more accurate and efficient. And we just wanted to highlight our newest tool to the audit committee. And I'll turn it back over to Ryan.
Well, it's fascinating technology, and looks like it'll be good to help you move your work forward. Any comments or questions? Mr. Moon?
Out of curiosity, how much did it cost?
Yes, I have that prepared. So we have 5 licenses. On an annual basis, it's about $9,900 for a year.
For 5?
For 5. So we highlighted this tool is because in the past we tried the other analytical tool, but because a lot of our processes are still quite manual, so we don't really have the data set that is available. So this tool allowed us to convert, like Luke mentioned, from a PDF, from an image, into an Excel that can increase our accuracy in the results. So that's why, like, one of the audit committee members asked, so we would like to show it to all the members so we can all, be benefit from it.
Wouldn't our finance office also benefit from something like that?
So I have shown it with the comptroller office, and I'm sure Simmer's team will be considering that. And Simmer, do you want to speak to it?
Sure. Mr. Moon, I think we would probably benefit greatly from this tool, and we'll be working with Esther to see how we can use it. Yes.
Okay. Seeing nothing further, we will move to number 5, which is our last item on peer review updates. Over to Esther.
Thank you. So it is the last item, and I've got a question also from one of our audit committee member and asked me about, we talked about peer reviews a lot, and we want to drill in and just talk a little bit about what it is. So essentially, the question comes, right? So who is auditing the auditor, right? Who is auditing OAG works? So this is the answer to it. So I'm going to just spend a few minutes, and then we will all be able to understand it a little bit better. So, moving on to slide 2 is the auditing standard. So at this time of the meeting, I won't go through what is Yellow Book or government auditing standard with you all, but essentially this is the regulation or the standard that we follow at OAG. And we have to be independent in mind and appearance. And then the last bullet here is also very important. So the Yellow Book, again, this is the government auditing standard, said that we are required to be audited every 3 years. So that's what peer reviewed is. So every 3 years, we have to hire someone from outside from OAG to kind of look at our report and our process to make sure that we are up to the standard. So it was, I think, sometime during 2022 or 23 that we have invited an external peer reviewer to come to look at our data. And then we are very glad to report, which is the slide following, and we have reported it before too, that we have received a clean audit report. that the Office of Auditor General for FCPS internal quality control system was adequately designed and operating effectively. So which is the next slide, and it shows you the actual report. All this information is on our website so that our community members can be benefit from it too. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank my team, especially Danielle and also my team member. We really spent a lot of time to make sure we provide a quality audit. And then at the same time, myself, not just we are being audited by outside, independent peer review team, I also serve as some of this external peer reviewer as well. So I have the opportunity to go to different, sites to audit, which is the next slide. And I just want to say that this is the perfect professional development, if you ask me, is even better than a paid training, because people are very open in the other internal audit shop to open their book for me to see, and then we can learn from it. So you can see under item 2 that I have been to some of the public schools office internal audit shop to see what they are doing, and in order to compare to what we are doing too. And upcoming, I will be serving as the peer review lead at the Anne Arundel County Public Schools in Maryland to check how they are doing their office, their audit. And then myself, I'm also part of the our National Association Peer Review Committee. So I'm part of their committee to ensure as a whole for the industry that we are doing our audits up to standard. So you can have the assurance as the audit committee member that the work produced at OAG is really at a world-class standard. Thus, we would like to assure you all. So what did we learn from all these peer reviews, and get to the last slide of this presentation? So we can definitely say that OAG is one of the leaders in the local government internal audit industry. And I listed out the bullet points of what we are really ahead of others, or we are at the, at the top of this, of the group, is that we passed the peer review that I mentioned earlier on. We use electronic work papers, including the data sniper that we just showcased to you all. The audit report format, instead of having you to read like a 20 pages novel, we highlight the key, outtake from the audits and executive summary that we write at the level of a 7th grader. So sometimes I ask my son to read and ensure they can understand my audit report before putting it here, to ensure the readability, right, that our community members can take benefit from it. We are also involved in an extensive risk assessment process, including you all here. We also have the different processes that Danielle walked us through at the document number 1 about the process we already started now in order to provide a comprehensive audit topic plan for you all to consider. We manage the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. Some of the other audit shops that I have been to, they only do audit. They don't manage the hotline. The hotline was managed by division counsel or someone else in their office. But here at OAG, we do both together. And we also conduct preliminary reviews and then provide reports to audit committee members to consider. And the certification of the team members too. Here we've got different CPA, certified public accountant, certified internal audit, internal auditor, certified fraud examiner, and certified information system auditor. Do I miss anyone else? Okay. So a lot of the alphabets, but I think this is something important that our work is really, the quality to ensure that is up for world-class quality. And of course, there are also some areas that OAG could further improve upon. One is the use of data analytics. And then 2 is how can we better prepare for the upcoming peer reviews is to conduct our self-assessment on all our audit documentation beforehand. That even though all our documentation has been reviewed internally, but we really want to speed up our internal review process. When we kind of have our full team very soon, right now we are in the final stage of hiring the Auditor 1, and at that stage, I think we will be able to get, our work at an even better shape going forward. So with that, that's kind of the last piece I would like to share with the audit committee.
Well, thank you and congratulations on all this work. Mr. Moon?
So how often you get the peer review done?
Mr. Moon, do you mean how often do people come? It will be every 3 years.
Every 3 years. Okay, and mentioning fraud, waste, and abuse, if someone were to allege any one of those against OAG, where would they go? Do they come to the school board?
So we are doing the preliminary review according to Regulation 1410, which is FCPS regulation. So it's laid out very clearly about the roles and responsibilities. I don't think there is an exception there talking about if OAG members are being like the subject of the matter, but it does mention like, for example, if a leadership team members or if a school board member is the subject, then what will be the outcomes of what needs to be done. But I don't think it mentioned if like we, like OAG is part, but however, I want to say this, right? Because we have to comply with the government auditing standard independence protocol. So if situation come at us, we have to report and we have to refrain from reviewing it. So that is by our professional protocol.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions?
By the way, I'm not alleging anything against OAG, so don't worry.
Okay, seeing nothing, that will bring us to the end of our agenda. Just want to let folks know that given that the agenda for the next meeting was going to be very light, we've decided to cancel it. So we will not be meeting on December 9th. Our next meeting will be January 13th, 2025.
I'm deeply disappointed
So-
missing.
We will be seeing everyone in the new year. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.